Mr. Friedman has an extensive background in New Mexico railroading history, having worked for many years in state government as a railroad administrator. He has also contracted with a variety of law firms as a railroad accident investigator and expert witness in railroad accident cases throughout the country. Fred is also a longtime board member of the Historical Society of New Mexico, having lectured on dozens of railroad topics associated with New Mexico that include steel gangs, Native American railroad workers, whatever happened to cabooses, and railroads as implementers of federal policy in the United States. So give a round of applause. Very excited to have you.
Story, thank you very much. We have a lot to talk about, so thank you very much for coming. And I expect this talk to last about 40 minutes, and then we're going to have 20 minutes of questions and answers, questions anyway, and you'll be out before dark. But with that, let me give you a little background on myself personally. My wife and I came here decades ago as college kids and ended up staying for a variety of reasons, and we've been here for over 50 years. And during that time, I worked in state government on a number of railroad issues and subjects, and when I retired from state government, I was asked by a couple of law firms if I would be willing to work for them in terms of railroad accidents throughout the country and just sort of looking at some of the causes and those kinds of things. And I found that to be very interesting. I did that for a while. But I really quit that after 3 years because, as some of you other retirees may know, as a consultant you have a shelf life. And for me, I saw that window being about 3 years for a variety of reasons. Number one, I wasn't staying up on the federal regulations anymore. Number two, I couldn't pick up the phone and call my friend in Iowa who had already dealt with that situation. There would be a ready contact for these kinds of things. Your contacts begin drying up. And finally, I decided there were other things I wanted to do other than railroads and trains. So I ended up doing that for a while. But then I came back to the Historical Society and was asked to give some talks on railroading history. And I've been giving lectures on New Mexico territorial and state railroads for a long time. And with that, I'll go ahead and start. This is a discussion of the railroads that operated not only within the city limits of Santa Fe, but within Santa Fe County. There were a lot of railroads for a variety of reasons, and we'll get into that. But it's important to understand, too, that the railroads existed and they were here to make a profit. And between 1878, when the first railroad came over Raton Pass into the territory of New Mexico, through 2026, there were over 200 railroads in New Mexico that came and went for a variety of reasons. They merged, some of them went bankrupt, some of them were destined to fail from the outset because of very poor management. Some of those railroads were paper railroads. They didn't have any cars, they didn't have engineers, locomotives, or anything else. All they wanted and got, because of the liberal territorial legislation encouraging railroads to come to New Mexico, those railroads ceased to exist. And a lot of them merged and various things happened to them. But we're left with a legacy of several railroads in Santa Fe that really were very important to the transition from statehood into, from territory into statehood. And I'll go into that too. But this is just a picture of some of the images around town that you're probably familiar with, that you've all seen. The Santa Fe Depot, the caboose on the corner of Cerrillos and St. Francis. There's a lot of discussion about that, a lot of history in that railroad depot and the caboose. And then we have a representative of two of the operating lines, Sky Railway and the commuter train that runs from Albuquerque to Santa Fe, and it even goes a bit further south than Albuquerque. And then the one at Salvador Perez Park which everybody calls the train park, but it's actually Salvador Perez Park. And all of those are part of the history. But with that, I'll just, let me see. Okay, between 1880, when the first railroad came into Santa Fe County in the present time, there were 17 railroads that operated on different alignments. And a lot of these merged, a lot of them went bankrupt. None of them were paper railroads, but they were all around for a while. And if you're talking about any one particular railroad, it's important to know what date you're talking about. But I'm going to do as little referencing to dates as possible, because it's hard to remember, nobody cares, and it's not that important if you just are looking at an overview. Those railroads operated on 5 separate alignments within Santa Fe County. There was the transcontinental line, and that's the white one in the middle there. And that came all the way from, actually, it's the Amtrak route now from Chicago to LA. And originally it came from Trinidad, Raton, Las Vegas, Lamy, and all the way out to Gallup. Then we have the Lamy branch. The Lamy branch is very important, first of all, because it's still operating, and it's a microcosm of railroading history in New Mexico that you can actually go and ride and walk on. It's a fascinating piece of real estate. Then we have the Chile line. The Chile line is the red line that's going north, and that was built south from Espanola, and there was some other construction that was also going north, but eventually we had rail service from the Chile line. And then the New Mexico Central line, the yellow one, goes out of Tomasitas, which was at one time called Union Depot. It was called Union Depot because it was shared by 2 companies, the Chile line and the New Mexico Central, also called the Santa Fe Central Railroad Company. Finally, we have the Cerrillos Coal Railroad Company, and right under the S in Santa Fe is a little green hook. That's a 4.5-mile line from Waldo on the Santa Fe Railway's main line all the way to Madrid. And you can still see remnants of that on Google Earth. A lot of that alignment is inaccessible because it's now on private property. The first question that might occur to you is, why would railroads want to come to Santa Fe to begin with? There wasn't any manufacturing, it wasn't a tourist destination yet. But Santa Fe has always been a destination from the 1500s up to the present time. The Camino Real terminated north of here at San Juan Pueblo, and went through Santa Fe. The Santa Fe Trail also from Independence, Missouri, all the way out here. Its terminus was at Santa Fe, and the Old Spanish Trail was another historic trail that included Santa Fe. So Santa Fe was on the mind and on the lips of transportation providers for centuries before the first line was actually constructed. There's some important legislation that led to the construction of rail lines and New Mexico Railroad history. One important piece of legislation that really were 4 separate acts signed by President Lincoln were the Pacific Railway Acts. During the Civil War, those were signed. And the provisions were to really build from Missouri all the way out to the West Coast. And the railroads were paid depending on the difficulty and the terrain that they were going through. And one of the things that the Pacific Railway Act did that was very important was to impose standard gauge. Standard gauge is 56.5 inches wide. A lot of railroads prior to this federal law deliberately had different gauges or width between the rails so that competing railroads couldn't ship anything on their lines, and they would have to keep it on that and then truck it or use wagons to get it to another destination. But that was really counterproductive, not only for the railroads, but certainly for the shippers and other people. There were some other important aspects of the Pacific Railway Act, and that was that it really became the legislation for manifest destiny. And if you think back to your high school or civics classes, manifest destiny was the political concept that it was the destiny of this country to expand from the Atlantic to the Pacific. The railroad was going to do that. And it was finally legitimized in the Pacific Railway Act. The second thing that that act did was dissolve several important treaties that we had with Native Americans. And because of that, the railroad was built through Indian land, and there were several subsequent laws that were passed, the Dawes Act, the Johnson Provision, several other laws that permitted the railroads to go through Native American land. It was the start also of railroads being implementers of federal policy. That's going on today even. The Rail Runner Express was a political concept, and it was built. So was Amtrak. Amtrak was signed in 1971 by President Nixon, but it was a government initiative, just like the Pacific Railway Act and other ones. The orphan trains were other examples. Native American children being transported to Pennsylvania to Indian schools were all provided by railroads, implementers of federal policy. That's another talk that I'm putting together now, but it's a fascinating subject. So anyway, that's some of the background on this. There was an excursion by a guy named A.A. Robinson. Robinson was the chief civil engineer for the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railway Company. And he was directed by the president to go to New Mexico, check it out, see if anything there is worth developing, if there were any assets, and if there were any problems with building in that particular alignment that was in mind by the Santa Fe as it came through. This is the map of where Robinson came through. He finished his report and he sent it on to the president of the railroad. And what he said in his write-up and report to the president of the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe were some important things. First of all, he said bypass Santa Fe and advance toward Rincon, then into Mexico and California. If any of you have traveled recently toward El Paso or Las Cruces, there's an exit for Rincon just before you get to Las Cruces. And that point even had a Harvey House at one time. It was an extremely important point because that's where trains diverged and went west to Deming to form the second transcontinental railroad with the Southern Pacific, or continued south to El Paso and into the Republic of Mexico. Remember when I first started, I said railroads are in the business to make money. And they didn't want to stop in New Mexico. New Mexico was a place on the way to somewhere else. The other thing that Robinson reported to the president was that all of the modes of life in the territory of New Mexico are primitive. The wooden plow is still used. He said, among these people, to depart from the usages of their grandfathers is sacrilegious. Santa Fe is a place of no commercial importance, sustained by political patronage. Some things change, some things don't change.
What year was this? What year was this?
This was 1875, 5 years before they decided to come through and build anyway. And also, he mentioned that no freight exists in New Mexico, even though there were potential with natural resources of coal, copper, timber, and later other things were discovered, uranium, potash, and a number of others. Our territorial governor at the time was Lew Wallace. Lew Wallace was a Civil War general for the North. He was known well and respected by Lincoln, and he helped get territorial legislation passed that were extremely favorable to railroads. For example, these are taken from the territorial laws of New Mexico from 1878, I think. Anyway, those statutes say, among other things, that the railroads could take, possess, and enjoy any materials, springs, streams of water as may be necessary for its uses and purposes in operating its railroads. Further, that those railroad companies could get voluntary grants or donations, or they could receive funds taken by the officers, engineers, surveyors, or agents to hold those lands and to do with it what they needed to as its directors deemed necessary, not as the legislature deemed necessary, not as the landowner deemed necessary, but as the directors of the railroad deemed necessary. It was so important that New Mexico have a railroad because that was what was going to make the difference between staying as a territory for more years or becoming a state. All the states around New Mexico at this time in 1880, 1878 already had railroads. Colorado did, Texas did, Oklahoma did, Arizona did, Utah, New Mexico didn't. Because of that mindset that New Mexico was a place to get through in order to get to Deming and the West Coast, or El Paso and the Republic of Mexico. In response to all of this, there was a Santa Fe County Committee of Substantial Citizens that was developed to convince the railroad that we at least needed a branch line off the main line. By that time, the railroad builders had passed Santa Fe and were moving on to Albuquerque and further south. This committee was comprised of a number of well-known Santa Feans, certainly the Archbishop himself, Jose Sena, the Spiegelberg brothers, W.H. Manderfield, Mr. Gildersleeve, all of them were very influential, and they were successful in their negotiations. The railroad made 3 offers to that committee for the construction of the railroad. The first was that Santa Fe would have to donate $175,000, and then the railroad would build a line from Lamy up. The second offer was if the city and the county decide to build the line with grades that can be operated at a reasonable cost and to the satisfaction of our engineer, we will furnish the rolling stock, the cars, and operate the line. And then finally, there was a third offer. The city of Santa Fe, the county of Santa Fe, and that committee comes back with a counter offer saying, rather than all of that, we'll offer you $150,000, and you guys build it and you guys operate it, and that was accepted. And we have the birthday of the Lamy branch coming up next month, February 9th. And that was when the train came up from Lamy. It was also when Lew Wallace pounded down the last spike. There were bands, there were all kinds of celebration, and it was a momentous occasion for the city and county of Santa Fe. But that's when it arrived, February 9th, 1880.
I wanted to know if it was 1880.
Yes, ma'am. And there was a newspaper quote saying, "The last link is forged in the iron chain which binds the ancient city of Santa Fe to the United States. The old Santa Fe Trail passes into oblivion." The lines that we're going to be talking about, that's the background, and now we're going to talk about each one of the various lines. I've got about 3 or 4 slides on each one, but I think it'll give you a nice overview of the importance of each one of the rail lines. First came the transcontinentals, the big name railroads that you've heard of, the Union Pacific, the Southern Pacific, the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe, all of those. They were followed by short line companies like the Chile Line, like the Santa Fe Central, like the Little Line that hauled coal from Waldo to Madrid back and forth, all of those. And then what followed were lumber camps, mining towns, and various communities that for one reason or another were more or less dependent on the railroad for their existence. Let's start with the Lamy Line. Lamy Line is 18 miles long. It's expensive to maintain. The railroad didn't want to build it in the first place, but they needed to get the committee off their back, so they did it. And it has 19 bridges, wooden bridges. It has 55 curves. The last thing a railroader wants on their line, if they're going to have one that's going to be hauling freight, are either bridges or curves. And there were a number of train companies that operated on the line. The first one, and the one that built it, its official name, was the New Mexico and Southern Pacific Railroad Company. It became the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railway. Then we have, and some of you probably recall, the Santa Fe Southern that used to run up and down on the line. And it did excursion trips, and it hauled some freight and a few things. Then the New Mexico Rail Runner Express used a portion of that line in order to get on their main line. And then finally, most recently, in 2006, Sky Railway appears, George Martin's railway, and that seems to be doing quite well, and there are all kinds of excursion rides, and it's a very interesting trip to take when you have out-of-town guests. There are some interesting structures on the Lamy Line. There is the depot itself, built in 1909. The first depot was built in 1881, and it was a wooden structure, but the other one on the left here is brick and stucco. There was a Fred Harvey Hotel there called the L. Ortiz, and it was built in 1910 and caught fire and was demolished in 1943, designed by Mary Coulter. And there are letters from people that were traveling between Los Angeles and the Midwest that stopped at the LRTs and decided to extend their stay for a week or two just because of the beauty and the environment that they experienced there. And they extended their vacation just to have more time at the LRTs. Finally, up in the rail yard is the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Depot. And that's pictured over on the right. And it was originally a wooden depot, and then it was replaced. And the railroad, Santa Fe, provided passenger service for about 30 years. And thereafter, people got off the train at Lamy, and there was a bus that took people to Santa Fe. And those people included Japanese-American internees, Manhattan Project engineers. A number of artists came to Santa Fe by train. I would imagine most of them came by train, with the exception of Charles Loomis, who walked everywhere. I think he walked from Chillicothe, Ohio, to Isleta Pueblo. But all the rest of them came by train. And that has been renovated, and it's a station stop for the rail runner and a tourist stop that's utilized very, very heavily. This is a Google Earth photo. And do you see the big triangle in the middle? Let me show you. Right here. What that is, that's a railroad Y, they call it. And that's where you turn trains around. The road running sideways is St. Michael's Drive. And where that Lamy line comes out is the Lottaburger on St. Michael's. And this was a Google shot that I took, I guess maybe 3 years ago from Google Earth. And where that line was going, trains would come up from Lamy. Let me get my little pointer here. Doesn't work. Anyway, trains would come up from Lamy and they would turn off and go on the line that went all the way to where the College of Santa Fe used to be and the developing property and all of that. There was an article in today's paper or yesterday's about the Bruns Army Hospital. And that's what the point of the Y and this line that went right through where the Social Security building is now on, I forget the name of the street there. But anyway, that was a very busy Y. And that Y, I'm glad I took that picture because it doesn't exist anymore. There's a housing development there now. And trains coming from Santa Fe could either use that Y and go into the Bruns Army Hospital, or they could just proceed straight. But it was an important link, and it was utilized heavily. On the bottom right is a picture of the Bruns Army Hospital on that campus. And I think the city of Santa Fe wants to buy that parcel and develop it into something today. I don't know what. Something. And these were on top. The image of the rail car and the soldier are the kinds of cars that would take casualties and deposit them at the hospital. They had over 1,000 people were employed there. There were a lot of military personnel. It really fused a lot of money into the local economy. It had 2,500 capacity beds. And all kinds of movie stars came out to entertain the troops that were laid up in the hospital. There are really two scenarios for the construction of that hospital. That hospital lasted only 3 years, 1941 to 43, and then it was closed. The original justification for the hospital was that as a result of heavy fighting in the South Pacific, that there was a need for a facility that could treat burn victims. And that was the official story. You may know that the Manhattan Project and the testing of the atomic bomb was going on at the same time. There is another scenario that the reason for the hospital was that medical facilities on the hill at Los Alamos were small and could not really handle anything catastrophic. But if something went terribly wrong on the hill, there needed to be a large facility that could handle these kinds of things. That's just a theory that is not substantiated yet anywhere, but I suspect it makes sense. I had a copy of General Grove's biography, and the name of it is Now It Can Be Told. And he tells supposedly all the secrets about developing the atomic bomb. There's nothing in there about the Bruns Army Hospital, which makes me even more suspicious. The transcontinental main line is the white line on the map, and that's the main one that comes through. And it was utilized by a number of railroad companies, including Amtrak. And there are were some historic structures of importance on that line just in Santa Fe County, as well as throughout the entire line itself. But Rowe used to have a two-story depot, wooden depot, that was a hotel. It wasn't a Harvey hotel, but it had a lot of passenger use. Glorieta had a depot. There was a place called Manzanares, and that is 1 mile north or east of Lamy, and it was an important site. But when the committee to get the railroad wanted to negotiate with the railroad, they used Lamy as the starting point going north into Santa Fe rather than Manzanares, and all the equipment from the Manzanares, he was a trader and a merchandising individual, was moved from Manzanares to Lamy. But you can still see remnants of that near Glorieta. Currently, the Lamy Depot and Kewah Trading Post and Kennedy are important depots. I'll get into other depots in a minute. I wanted to talk about the New Mexico Central line. That's the yellow one that goes from Tomasitas south. And it goes through Moriarty, Estancia, Stanley, those places. And that line was known as the pinto bean line because that was an agricultural product that was developed in that area, as well as sheep and passengers. And that line changed its name over time. Originally, it was the Santa Fe Central Railway Company. Then it became the Albuquerque Eastern Railroad. Shortly after that, the New Mexico Central Railroad. Then it was purchased after it was having financial problems, and instead of being the New Mexico Central Railroad, it became the New Mexico Central Railway. And then finally, it was purchased and then sold off in bits by the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Company. And the last bit of the line to go was between Willard and Moriarty in 1974. This is another Google Earth shot, and there are some important structures on that line. The one on the top right is the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Depot, and that's important, and I think it's been plaqued and recently rehabilitated. And then just below that is Tomasitas. Tomasitas was built, the structure was built by the Santa Fe Central Railroad, 1909, I'm quite sure. And it accommodated the Chile line that ran north, and it was a narrow gauge, and the New Mexico Central that ran south, and it was a standard gauge, 56.5 inches wide. Down at the bottom of the picture, there's another red circle, and this is the Santa Fe Realtors Association's building. And that building was a turntable for both the Chile line and the New Mexico Central. And the way they accommodated both narrow gauge and standard gauge was to put 3 rails on the turntable. And then the reason for a turntable, it saves a lot of land and it saves time by driving a locomotive or some cars, and then several men would get on one side of it and push it around until it was 90 degrees in the other direction, and then it could either back up or go ahead or whatever it wanted to. But there was no real power for that turntable except men pushing it on the side. So you can still see ties, concrete ties. There is a place by the Realtor building that's been exposed with a railing over it, and you can look down and actually see the concrete ties. But I mean, it's just an important bit of New Mexico history, not only for the facility itself, but to demonstrate that these little railroad companies that we don't ever hear about anymore survived by helping one another. These are some of the depots on that New Mexico Central line. The one on the upper right is in Moriarty, and that was the depot for Moriarty when that line was operational. It's been used for a variety of other things. It was a hardware store, it was a church, it was an insurance office, and the last time I went by it was just boarded up, but it's still there. The other image on the lower right is off of I-25, and I think it's mile marker 282, but in the distance there on the horizon, those structures are the community college. That raised piece of land, that alignment, is the built-up grade of the New Mexico Central Railroad that was going out past the community college onto Estancia, Moriarty, and Willard, where it tied in with the Chicago, Rock Island, and Pacific, and passengers could get on the train at Tomasitas, go all the way down, hook up with the Rock Island, and go either to Chicago or out to California. The bottom left image is what's left of the grade of the New Mexico Central as you go down State Road 41 near Stanley. You can still see that. And up on the top left is the community center building in El Dorado. That depot used to be at a place called Kennedy. Kennedy was a New Mexico Territorial Supreme Court justice, and that depot was on the New Mexico Central line where the Santa Fe intersected with it. There was a cross there. Before El Dorado was built, that depot was transferred up to where El Dorado now is, and it was a ranch headquarters. And then more recently, it became the community center for El Dorado. I remember before that depot had a lot of paint on it and was fixed up, that if you were to look at the word El Dorado in the summer, when the sun was really shining on it, the word Kennedy bled out from the paint anyway, and you could still read it. I think they painted it over about 6 times now. So you can't see it now, but that depot has an interesting past and a personality. There are some other depots that a lot of these lines used, and there are really some distinction between the short line depots that are all over the place in New Mexico. We have 82 remaining historic structures, railroad depots, in Lee County by Hobbs, over in Farmington. Gallup has some. You can drive by them, and if they sort of look like depots to you, they were. Because they were all over the place. And the short line companies didn't have the budgets that the Class 1 railroads did. They had to build with whatever they had. Sometimes the depots were adobe, sometimes they were logs, sometimes they were made out of railroad ties. They were usually wooden, they could be thrown up easily, and if the line had to move like a logging company or coal lines did, then they could actually move the depot and put it somewhere else too. The major railroads had buildings that were designed by professional architects, either in Chicago or in California, and they could replicate those depots wherever they wanted to put another depot. That's why the depot in Moriarty, the depot in Vaughan, the depot in Las Vegas sort of look alike. They were made from the same blueprints. They were expensive and they were well constructed. That's why they're still standing. And you can see those depots in places like Vaughan, Moriarty, Las Vegas. Raton still has its depot, and certainly Santa Fe. This is a map of the Chile line that I'd like to talk about now. And the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad was an expansive line, and it consisted of both narrow gauge and standard gauge rail. And it operated in primarily the southwest quadrant of Colorado, but then came down, as the blue line illustrates, into Espanola and eventually Santa Fe, and then hooked up with lines in New Mexico. There were a number of operators that operated the Chile line. The Chile line is just that blue line, because that was part of the freight that the line hauled, in addition to Espanola apples and sheep and passengers, all in the same train. And there were a number of railroads that operated on that line. It was the Texas Santa Fe and Northern Railroad that made the link happen, and that's the line that was built from Espanola south to Santa Fe. There was one called the Santa Fe Southern Railway, which preceded the second Santa Fe Southern Railway. And there was also the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad, and then that eventually became the Denver and Rio Grande Western Railroad Company. This is the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad Depot in Santa Fe on the left, and that is what we refer to now as Tomasitas, but that's the original building, and then other sections were constructed onto it. And then to the west of that is the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railway. All that was in the rail yards. There's another very important depot within Santa Fe County, and it's the subject of a book called The House at Ottawee Bridge. It's a wonderful book, and it's short and doesn't take long to read. But the station mistress there, Edith Warner, ran that depot for a number of years and accommodated not only the boys that were going up to the ranch school in the early 1940s before it was taken over by the Department of Defense, and she also catered to Manhattan Project scientists that were permitted to go there just to get off the hill and to go out to dinner, and she would make delicious meals for people. Edith Warner knew Robert Oppenheimer and had an agreement that she would make and serve meals for scientists that were there. They didn't need a pass to get into her facility like they did going into Santa Fe. It was much less complicated, and it satisfied both her needs and those that were working on the Manhattan Project. I'll show you. This is a national park photograph of that. You know, when you're going to Los Alamos, you go over the Rio Grande. Excuse me. Let me just. Okay, this is essentially the road that we take now, and this is the depot. That is the bridge that the train would go over to cross the Rio Grande, and it would keep going. And there were other buildings nearby that Edith Warner had constructed for both guests. She had a guest house, there was a tea room, and a few other buildings. But this is a 1946 or 47 aerial photograph of what the area was like. And you can still see remnants of those buildings now. I've got another map. Anybody have questions on this before I leave it? Okay. This is a Park Service map because that site is now an historic district. And it's right on the western edge of San Ildefonso Pueblo. And let me just sort of point things out to orient you. That main road is the road to Santa Fe and the road to Los Alamos. And The yellow square shows where the boxcar station was, the Ottawa station. And the green one is a 1934 guest house that was constructed for people that wanted to stay overnight. And the green square is the tea room where Manhattan Project representatives and scientists were entertained by Edith and served all kinds of things that they enjoyed. So it's a interesting layout of what's there, and part of those buildings are still visible when you cross that bridge.
Is there a marker there? Is there a historic marker there?
No, it's on San Ildefonso Pueblo land,
Oh, got it.
and they don't want a marker. So that's it for that line. So I wanted to move on to another.
Wasn't there a station in Budo also, where the water tower is, for the chili run?
There is one in Embudo, but that's out of Santa Fe County, and I was trying to limit it to Santa Fe County, yeah. The other line that I wanted to talk about is the Cerrillos Coal Company. And that's that little green stub. It was only 4.5 miles long, and it was constructed by a short line operator called the Cerrillos Coal Railroad Company. That site in Madrid for developing and mining coal was important because it produced two kinds of coal, bituminous and anthracite. The railroad needed it for its locomotives, and the rest of the country wanted coal for heating and production. Another Google Earth photo, and you can see the railroad Y. The line up here is the Santa Fe main line, and that's still in place. Amtrak still runs on that line, as does the Rail Runner. And this is the line going down to Waldo. And with those arms of the Y are still apparent. And these little dots are the coking ovens that were used to make coke from the coal from Madrid. And I think those coking ovens are gone, but you can see remnants of them anyway at Waldo. There was an ad that appeared in the Albuquerque Journal and the Wall Street Journal in, I think, 1954. And what it said was, entire town for sale. 280 houses, a grade and a high school, a general store, tavern, machine shop, mineral rights for 9,000 acres, excellent climate, fine industrial location, Albuquerque and Cerrillos Coal Company, Madrid. There were no takers. And the price might have been too high, $250,000. Between the 1980s and this is where I'm trying to get it back up to today. Between the 1980s and the 1990s, there were a lot of problems for the mainline railroads. There were several pieces of legislation introduced to regulate the railroads again, and they began losing money, and the result was that numbers of them went bankrupt. The Southern Pacific, the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe, all the big name railroads that you might be able to recall, the Chicago, Rock Island, and Pacific, all of them either had to merge, like the Santa Fe did with the Burlington Northern to become the Burlington Northern Santa Fe. The Southern Pacific merged with the Union Pacific. Anyway, it was a huge transition in the railroad industry during that decade between 1980 and 1990. And there were a lot of railroads that were forced to liquidate. That's how we got the Santa Fe Southern running the branch line. The Santa Fe Railway wanted to abandon that line, meaning pull up. Abandoning a line is a legal transaction that permits the railroad to stop service on a line. They can't just decide to stop service because they have shippers, they have people dependent on it, it's interstate commerce, so the federal government has a lot to say about it. The railroad wanted to abandon that line. I remember being in that meeting, and there were 3 people that came forward and said that they were interested in purchasing the line. 2 of them got together and actually purchased it. The other bidder for that line was from a company that dismantled railroads and wanted to sell the ties to landscaping company and the steel to other companies or to whoever needed railroad steel. But the 2 gentlemen that decided they were going to try to run a railroad kept it going for 20 years until Sky Railway came in, stepped in, and purchased it. And it's currently used by the Rail Runner commuter system, Sky Railway, and once in a while there'll be a special train for somebody that owns their own business car and travels around the country. They can lease that line for access into Santa Fe. As of today, these are the railroads that we have. You've got Amtrak, and that's been around since 1971, and it's been chronically underfunded since its inception. I won't say any more about that, but it's a whole story. Burlington Northern Railroad operates on the main line. Sky Railway, as I mentioned, runs on the Lamy branch, and the Rail Runner commuter line is 97 miles, and it connects Berlin through Albuquerque to Santa Fe. A lot of knowledgeable people say that that wasn't a good idea. I remember being in state government, and for probably 5 or 6 years, the legislature wanted a study of the idea of a commuter line between Santa Fe and Albuquerque. Was it going to be worth it? What are the environmental impacts? What do the 6 sovereign nations between Albuquerque and Santa Fe have to say about it? All of that. All of the reports said don't build it. It's never going to make money. It's going to be a liability. Even the state police were opposed to it, because they thought that they couldn't make U-turns on I-25 if they were in pursuit of someone. And there's some validity to that. Bill Richardson comes in, and in a meeting I recall, he said, you know all those studies? Forget it, build it. And that's why they built the commuter line between Albuquerque and Santa Fe. It doesn't make money. It's not profitable. But it's not supposed to be. Airports don't make money. Mississippi River barges don't make money. All kinds of public needs are addressed by it, and it also has the potential of extending both north and south to connect Denver and El Paso. Right now, in the continental United States, between the West Coast and the Mississippi River Valley, there are no trains that go north-south. They all go east-west. And as a matter of fact, if you want to go to Denver from Albuquerque, you can do it. But you either have to go to Chicago or Los Angeles for your connections, and it takes 3 days. Again, this is just a review, and I've got at the end of this some reading suggestions, and I printed those out if anybody wants to read any interesting books about this, or take a picture of the screen. And then finally, I have Edith Warner's recipe for chocolate cake.
You can hand up for that.
Yeah, more takers for that. Yes, ma'am?
I have a question. Have you been a part of any discussions of the rail runner running through Albuquerque all the way to the airport?
Yes. The problem was that, I don't know when it was, but Albuquerque was in the process of renovating its airport, say 10 or 20 years ago. And at that time, there was so much construction and open questions that simultaneous with the plans for the construction of the rail runner, the two were not in sync at the time. And because of that, and Governor Richardson wanted that because that was going to be his legacy and he wanted it before he left office, you know, there was sort of a hurry up and build it. Not surprising in New Mexico. This is my favorite image of railroading in New Mexico. The line on the left is the line that was built in 1880. It's the Lamy Branch line. It has jointed rail. Those rail joints are held together with bolts, and it has oak timbers for ties. You can walk on that, and it's a wonderful experience just to be on that old line. On the other side, to the right, is the alignment for the rail runner. Concrete ties that weigh 600 pounds each on pieces of steel that are welded together, each piece a quarter of a mile long. And it's just fantastic to be able to, you can literally put one foot in the 19th century and the other in the 21st there. And you know, I'll tell you where that location is. Do you know where I Associates is? Well, if you go to follow that road until you come to the hospital. There's a little sort of a doctor's hospital, they call it. In the back of that, there's a parking area, and you can just sort of walk over the hill and see that. And it makes my socks roll up and down when I put one foot in one line and the other in the other.
You said a term early in the presentation of paper railways. What are those?
There were railroads on paper, but if you would go out and look for a locomotive or a caboose or a worker, there aren't any, because all they wanted to do, the owners, was to acquire a 100-foot wide corridor that went somewhere that they could use for oil and gas lines, for, well now, fiber optic cables, those kind. There are still paper railroads.
In the old days, was there ever a single train between Denver and El Paso, or did one have to change somewhere?
No, the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe would do that. And you could take it all the way from Denver down to Trinidad, into Raton, and then all the way down.
The same passenger train, or did one have to change somewhere between?
Same train, same company. Other questions?
If the construction that you talked about had not prevented the train from going to the airport in Albuquerque, would it be possible today for it to go? Are the grades such that you could do that?
You know, that the rail runner needs a champion, needs somebody in politics that knows how to get stuff done. And I mean, there are thousands of us, myself included, that say, well, it'd be so cool, and I don't see why that train can't go from Denver to Albuquerque and then on to El Paso. It just makes sense, and there are all kinds of justifications for it. But I'm not going to lobby the legislature and set up in the middle of the night for the committee hearings and meetings that it takes. I mean, the rail runner needs a champion. It doesn't have one now. But I think Bill Richardson had a vision. And what that line is now, it's only 97 miles long, but it was the beginning of something that he saw much larger than that. And the potential is still there. There are tracks in place that go from Albuquerque south. The problem is it's known as dark territory. That means to the railroaders that it's not signaled. They operate on timetables and train orders. And it's mandated that for passenger trains, it has to be signaled because it's safer. That's expensive. That's one of the problems. And then there are 6 sovereign nations. that's not a problem, but those people have opinions that need to be accommodated as well. So it's a big deal, and it seems simple, but it isn't. With that, I'll let you go, but thank you very much.